Hey, what's going on? It's Jonathan Boyd, and right now I want to dive into a really big question that seemingly almost nobody can directly answer. But that's what we're going to do right now. So, the big question is, what is a key? Good question, right? What is a key? So, I actually highly suggest that you go back and watch the Learning the Notes training before you watch this one, okay? Some of the things in the notes training you're going to need to or want to know before you watch this training, it'll make a little bit more sense. All right, so as an overview, first we're going to talk about what a key is and why it's essential for us to know what a key is. Okay, it's really going to help us and how we think about playing guitar. So we're also going to talk about what it means to actually play in key. What does that mean? We're going to talk about the difference between the keys and why you would choose one over the other. So, the big question, what is a key? Well, as I like to think of it, a key is actually a container. I know that sounds odd right now, but just follow along with me and it'll make a lot more sense. So, a key is a container. Just like a marble bag contains marbles, and a piggy bank contains coins, a key, a musical key, contains notes. So the marble bag holds marbles. You know, there's marbles in the bag. Or in a piggy bank, there's coins inside the piggy bank. Well, within a key, there are notes inside the key. I'm sure you've heard the term in key before, right? Okay. So different keys contain a different set of letter notes. So it's just like if you were to have, let's say, 3 different piggy banks, and you might have piggy bank number 1 and piggy bank number 2 and piggy bank number 3. Well, you could say that piggy bank number 1 contains all, let's say, nickels, and then piggy bank number 2 could contain all dimes, or piggy bank number 3 could contain all quarters. But the thing is, each piggy bank contains coins. They're all coins. Whether they're nickels, dimes, or quarters, they're all coins. Okay? So different keys contain a different set of letter notes. A key is usually hard to think about, and that's why we're talking about it. So a key is just some kind of abstract idea. You know, it's invisible. We can't actually see it. We can see a piggy bank, and we can see coins inside a piggy bank, or we can see a marble bag, and we can see marbles inside the bag, but you can't see a key. So it's really easy to, think it's this big, complicated, complex idea that only musical geniuses get. That's just not the case. We're going to make it really, really easy, all right? So here's another question. Which notes does a key actually contain? So which notes are inside a key? Well, if you remember, in music, we have 12 possible different notes. And when we talk about these 12 notes, what we're actually referring to is the 12 different letters, okay? So we have our 7 natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then we have our other 5 notes, which we sometimes call accidentals, but they're really called sharps and flats. So 7 plus 5 is, of course, 12, and that gives us all 12 of our possible notes that we can play in music. So you also know that we have what we call right notes, in other words, the notes that sound good, and we have this concept of wrong notes, or notes that don't sound so good, notes that we would say maybe even sound bad. So what is it that actually determines which notes sound right and which notes sound wrong? This may sound really simple right now, but I'm going to explain it a little more. So what determines which notes are right or wrong? Well, whether they're inside the key or not. Okay? So, which notes are in and which notes are out? Again, we have 12 possible notes that we could play in music. And you already know that a scale is made from some kind of combination of those 12 notes, right? So for example, we could play notes number 1, 2, and 3, and maybe 6 and 7, and that would make a scale. It's just any combination of these 12 notes, we could make a scale out of them, or it makes a scale, rather. So again, for example, the major scale, which is what we're talking about, is actually made from 7 of these 12 different notes, okay? Just 7 of them. So let's talk about those 7 major scale notes. Well, as you already know, the major scale is made of 7 of the 12 possible notes, and this little pattern that I have drawn here, the red notes, are actually the first 7 notes from major scale pattern number 1. Now, this pattern, note number 1, in this particular chart, I know it's not starting on the 3rd fret like you might be used to. This chart, or this pattern, is we just slid up the entire pattern 2 whole frets. So the whole pattern is just moved up 2 whole frets. So it's starting on the 5th fret, okay? So if you played any one of these 7 notes, it would sound right, okay? Because all of those notes are in the key, and I'll explain more about that in just a second. So you got to remember, it's really important to think about for this particular example that all of these red notes in this particular order are the beginning of major scale pattern number 1. Okay, so if you follow along with my mouse cursor, we have note number 1, then we go up to note number 2 according to major scale pattern 1, right? Then we go up to note number 3, then we go to note number 4, then we go to note number 5, then we go to note number 6, and then finally we go to note number 7. Well, what happens after note number 7? If we're going to continue major scale pattern 1, we would go to the next fret, which on this chart would be fret 7. The 7th fret on the D string, which would turn out to be. And right where my mouse cursor is right now, this is where note number 1 would start over again, except it would be in the new octave, or a higher octave, okay? So there are some gaps that we didn't play. There are notes that we didn't play on our way up in major scale pattern 1. Let me go back to just the 7 notes. I want you to watch the chart. We have just the 7 notes. Now we have these black notes. Just the 7 notes with all of these gaps for the notes that we didn't play. Now we're going to fill in the gaps with all of these black notes. So these other 5 notes, the black notes, are actually not in the scale. If they were in the scale, they would be red. So remember again that after note number 7 in our major scale, note number 1 is going to start over again right here in the new octave. Okay, but we're only talking about 1 octave right now. And I know these numbers may look a little bit confusing, how we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in red notes, and then we have 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 in black notes. The black note numbers really don't matter for right now. All I did was just literally number them so you can see that we have 12 total notes, okay? So all of the black notes will actually sound wrong because they're not in the key. They're not, in other words, for right now, they're not in the major scale pattern, or they're not one of the red notes, okay? So how does this relate to keys? This is going to make a little more sense in just a second. If we remember, a key is a container. So if I have a little box, I can just say this box is our container, okay? And this box is going to contain some of the notes. And how many notes is it going to contain? Well, if we're going to play the major scale, it has 7 notes. So if these 7 notes from the major scale are literally inside the key, remember the key is our container or our box, okay? The box is the key, and these 7 notes are inside the key. If these 7 notes are inside the key, and we actually have 12 possible notes, well, that means that the other 5 notes are literally outside of the key. They're literally not in the box. Okay, it's easier to see, to visually see the notes inside the key and the notes outside of the key. So now we have something to actually relate to for what a key is, instead of it being some kind of abstract example that we can't really think about. So again, the notes that are inside the key tend to sound right, or they tend to sound good. And the notes that are outside of the key tend to sound wrong. That's how we hear them anyway. They don't sound good. So we actually use scale patterns to help us play the right notes. In other words, to help us play the notes that are literally inside of the key and avoid the wrong notes. So again, by using a pattern, we can hit the right notes and avoid the wrong notes. It's really that simple. By using this scale pattern, and if we played notes number 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, by skipping these, let's say, the space in between 1 and 2, the space in between 2 and 3, the space in between 4 and 5, and so on, what we're doing is actually just avoiding the wrong notes. So the pattern helps us play the right notes. It's a lot easier to remember a pattern than it is to remember the names of a bunch of different random notes everywhere on the fretboard. Okay? Like I just said, patterns are much, much easier to remember than lists of random letter notes. And believe me, you might have tried it. I've definitely tried it. For me personally, it doesn't work. And that's, trying to remember all of the letter notes and then actually trying to use that memory when you're actually playing, well, it just really doesn't work. Humans are much more wired to recognize patterns so much easier than remembering a bunch of abstract note names and then remembering where they are on the fretboard. Okay? So, let's now talk about the name of a key, because it can sound confusing because there are all these different names for keys like A major or B flat minor or let's say F sharp minor or something like that. Now that sounds confusing. For right now, I want you to think that the name of the key doesn't matter, because the name is just that. It's just a name. It's just a label. It's just what we call it, okay? But no matter what the name of the key is, whether it's F sharp minor or B major or something like that, I want you to think and I want you to remember that all we're referring to is the name of the box. That's it. Remember, the key is a container, and in this case, we drew it as a box. So whenever you hear the name of a key, all it is just the container that contains 7 notes. That's it. It's just the name. All right? So again, we have different names for these different keys. The reason we have different names is because the different keys literally contain different sets of letter notes. As a really, really simple example, let's just assume we had 3 notes in a key. So 3 notes inside this box, okay? Again, this is just an example. You know we have 7, but let's just assume that we had 3 notes in a key. So inside this box, I can say, let's say the key of X, which is what I have labeled here. So in the key of X, we have the notes A, B, C. In the key of X, we have the notes A, B, and C. So if different names contain different sets of letter notes, I might have another key, which is called the key of Y. And that's literally just a different box, okay? The key of Y would have a different set of letters. So if the key of X had notes A, B, C inside of it, well, the key of Y might have notes, E, F, G inside of it. That's the only difference, okay? It's just a labeling system. The name of the key is just a labeling system for us. So let's talk about different keys using the same scale pattern, which will be major scale pattern 1. Now again, this might look a little confusing at first, but it's really, really simple. Let me point it out. So if you notice, this is the beginning of major scale pattern number 1. It's the first 7 notes in major scale pattern number 1, or in other words, the first octave of major scale pattern number 1. What I've done below the numbers is just listed the actual letter notes for the locations of each one of these numbers. So note number 1 is an F note, note number 2 is a G note, note number 3 is an A note, and you get the idea, so on. So the notes we have here are actually F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. In the key of F major, for right now, wherever you start major scale pattern number 1 is the name of the major key. Let me say that again. Wherever you start major scale pattern 1 is the name of the major key. So note number 1, guess what? It starts on an F note. Well, F is the name of the major key that these notes are in. So all of these notes are in the key of F major. Well, what does that mean? If we come over here to the right side of the slide, remember that a key is a container. So in the key of F major, what that means is the key, which is the container, the box, contains the notes in this scale pattern right here, which is F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. Just like we have on the actual scale chart, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. So let's change the key and see what happens. So if we slide this scale pattern up or to the right 2 frets, we get this. What happens is the numbers are the same. We still have 7 numbers. The pattern's still the same, but now the letters are different. That's because the letters are always in the same place on your fretboard. As a side note, if you're always in standard tuning, the letters on the fretboard, the letter notes in the fretboard, on the fretboard, are always in the same place. But that's a little bit different topic that we'll talk about a different time. So I want you to notice here that, again, the numbers are in the exact same place, but the letters are different, okay? So if we start on G, if note number 1 is on G, and we're playing major scale pattern 1, G is the name of the major key. So we're in the key of G major right now. So the key, this box, of G major, which is where we started, G, contains the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, and just happens to be in F sharp. All right? All I want you to get here, I don't want you to memorize any of these notes. I don't want you to think all of this stuff is complicated. The only thing I want you to get out of this right now is that when we move this pattern, the notes change. That's really it. Okay? As long as you can remember and think about that a different key or each key is just a container that has different notes in it, that's all you need to get out of this right now. Okay? So let's actually change the notes again. If we slide up 2 more frets, same thing happens. All of the numbers are exactly the same. The scale pattern is exactly the same. The numbers are in exactly the same place. But again, the notes change. The letter notes are different now. Okay? So now we would be in the key of A major because we started on A and we're playing a major scale, or the major scale rather. So we're in the key of A major. Remember, the key is just this container here, and the notes inside of this key are A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. Again, don't worry about trying to memorize these notes or anything. The only thing we need to get out of this is that the notes are different when we move the pattern around. That's it. All right? So the real important thing, and what we're going to focus on, and what makes your life a whole lot easier and more fun, is that the 7 notes inside any key feel the same. Okay? In every single key, regardless of what the letter notes are, the numbers always feel exactly the same. So remember, we have 7 different notes that each create their own feeling. And again, I would suggest that you refer to the 7 notes training if this is a new concept to you. We go a little more in depth on the 7 notes and the different feelings that they create there. Okay? So, just to recap, if we slide our scale pattern to start on a different note, the letters change. The letters meaning the letters of each note in the pattern. Okay? The good thing is, like we already mentioned, the numbers don't change, and the feelings, this is the most important part, the feelings those numbers create don't change. And that's awesome for us. So the real question is, what's the difference between keys? So now, if we can just recap for just a second, what we talked about was that a key is just a container. A key is just like a box, okay? And what goes in the box? Well, different notes, different sets of 7 notes. If we change keys, or in other words, if we look in a different box, what we're going to find is different sets of letter notes. Okay, that's it. That's all we've talked about so far. So what's the difference between the boxes other than the letter notes being different? If there's 7 notes in each key, and each one of the numbers feels the same, what's the difference between the keys? Or what's the difference between the boxes? So what is a key again? I know we're really hammering this point home, but it's really important to think of it in a really simple way. Remember that a key is just a container. It's just like a box, okay? And one key contains 7 notes, and those 7 notes create 7 different feelings. The feelings are the same for every key. In other words, in every key, note number 1 feels like note number 1. Note number 4 feels like note number 4. Note number 5 feels like note number 5. So, our real question is, what's the difference between the keys? The only difference is the pitch. The pitch of the keys. So as you can see here, I've drawn some steps, and that's kind of fitting because on your guitar you have steps. If you, let's say you move up 1 fret or down 1 fret, that's called going up a half a step, or down a half a step, or you've probably heard of half steps or whole steps before. Anyway, if we change the pattern, we were talking about major scale pattern number 1, which has 7 notes in it. So right now, and on all of these boxes, you can see we have our little 7 red dots. And if you count, yes, there's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So for any box, remember, we have the same 7 red notes in these boxes. The only difference between each of these boxes, as you can see from the chart on the right side, or the graph on the right side, the more we go up and to the right, the higher the pitch gets. The higher the pitch of all the notes inside the box. The further down and to the left we go, the lower the pitch gets. And, I think that's it. I forgot what I was going to say. So the higher the pitch gets going to the right, the lower the pitch gets going to the left. Remember, though, that the same notes are in every single box, the same numbers, and we want to focus on the numbers because the same numbers create the same feeling. All the keys contain the same 7 notes with the same 7 feelings, just at a higher or a lower pitch. So that's great and everything, but so why would we want to choose one key over another? Why would we want to play in a different key? Well, to make the overall pitch higher or lower. In other words, by changing the key, and you may be familiar with this already, you can change the pitch of an entire song. So you can take one song let's say, I don't know, it doesn't matter what song it is. Think of any song that you can think of. You can actually change the key of that song. It's still going to be the same song, just at a different pitch. In other words, the way the song makes you feel at different points, the reason why you might like the song, none of that stuff changes. The only thing that changes is the pitch of the song. So the actual song can sound higher in pitch or lower in pitch. And usually, or what's common, you might have heard somebody say, if it's a singer, you might have heard them say, hey, put this one in the key of C, or put this one in the key of A. The reason they're doing that is all they're doing is moving the pitch of the entire song up or down to fit whoever's singing, to fit their natural vocal range. Okay, so if something is, let's say there's a song that's too high in pitch for someone to sing, well, you can play the same song at a lower pitch just by changing the key. Let's say you change the key down a few notches, or go down a few notes, or whatever you want to call it. If I go back to my stair analogy here, let's say there's a song that actually is played at this top key here, and you can see it's at a higher pitch. Well, if you're a singer and you have a really deep voice, you probably can't sing this high to hit all the right notes in this particular key. So what you want to do is, let's say you walk down the stairs, you step the key down to, let's say, this key right here. All of the chord changes, all of the notes that are played are all going to feel exactly the same because the key contains the same 7 notes. The only difference is the entire song is just going to be at a lower pitch, and that will allow you to, with your vocal range, with a low vocal range, to hit all of the right notes. So I know all this stuff may be new information at first. The thing is, it's really, really simple when it starts to sink in. So I really highly encourage you to review this lesson periodically. And again, your understanding will deepen with repeat exposure. I just want to recap real quick about what we talked about and the key takeaways, pun intended, the key takeaways from this particular training. All we need to remember is that a key is just a container that contains notes. Every key has the same 7 notes inside of it. And each of the numbers feel the same in every single key. The only difference between the keys is the pitch. All right? So again, come back to this lesson, review it, learn a little more. Your understanding will deepen. Every time you do, it's going to make a whole lot more sense. And you're really going to start getting this stuff with more exposure. So for now, just go ahead and continue on.